Hello, welcome to the third day of Baltic Summer School of Digital Humanities. For today's keynote lecture, it is my great honor to introduce Róbert Péter from the University of Szeged, Hungary. He is also a director of the Digital Humanities Laboratory at the University of Szeged, and he will give a very interesting lecture about also text analysis, data analysis, but mostly decoding 18th century British Masonic print culture. And when you think about asking questions to Robert, you can take into account that he knows everything about digital humanities projects in Europe and across the world, and especially related to text analysis and libraries. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And let me begin by thanking the organizers of the Baltic Summer School for their kind invitation. It's really a privilege and honor to be here among colleagues and students who share an interest in digital humanities. In my lecture, I will basically offer 3 case studies, and I use these case studies to demonstrate how computational methods can help us to reveal overlooked patterns, connections, trends, and even resolve questions about authorship of a given work. This is the structure of my presentation. First, I will introduce a text mining tool that we've been developing at my university for years. The reason why I'd like to briefly introduce this tool because I used it as a research environment for the first 2 case studies. So I will only summarize the workflow and the most important points that are necessary to understand the case studies. Then, as the entire lecture is concerned with the topic of Freemasonry, I need to briefly introduce what Freemasonry is. Another context is related to the sources that are used for the presentation, namely early modern texts. I will talk about the challenges, the problems that I encountered while working with these texts, and basically then I will have the 3 case studies focusing on newspapers, trends, social network analysis, and lastly the constitutional authorship attribution. So the reason why we started the development of this EverMet program, EverMet stands for the Analysis and Visualization of Bibliographic Metadata and Text, was that in some years ago we organized a workshop, a similar workshop like this at my university, and we invited people from various faculties, including the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Software Engineering, Artificial Intelligence Department, and basically the key question or central problem of the conference was how we can use data-driven methods in humanities research. And the audience gave feedback, and basically the conclusion was that many of the people did not have the necessary coding skills, or those days most tools supported the English language. We didn't have a language model, for example, for Hungarian, and many people were unable to analyze large private collections. Another problem was related to the insufficient computing capacity. They didn't have access to basically supercomputers those days, and still this is a major problem. And as all of you work on projects, it is a fundamental requirement in many projects that you share the databases that you created during a project. And this was also a kind of a requirement or request. So this EverMet tool, the idea is to offer a critical and interactive analysis of bibliographic metadata and text at scale. The reason why we try to combine metadata and text is that you can ask much more complex research questions if you focus on both rather than just drawing on either metadata or text. We use data-driven methods, including natural language processing methods. We can use the transformer models in 24 languages. There is a user-friendly interface, and the service runs in the cloud, so you don't have to install anything. This is the workflow of the software. This is typical in digital humanities research, as you could see from the previous presentations. First, you upload your corpus, and it is necessary to clean it. Then you can configure each analytical module. Then you can test whether you are satisfied with your configuration. It is especially important when you work with large databases. If you are discontent, you can modify these configuration settings, and then you can filter your corpus and run the analysis on this filtered subcorpus. And then comes the analytical phase when you can discover new insights, and you can export the results, both the configuration settings and the actual tabular data, and it's an iterative workflow. We published basically the workflow in peer-reviewed publications and also on the SSH Open Marketplace. This is very important, this SSH Open Marketplace, because it has numerous introductions and tutorials about digital humanities tools, methods, and workflows. It's a kind of a recent initiative by Daraya, and I highly recommend to use this collection. So these are the 11 analytical modules that are supported by Evermat. I will use only 5 of these during the presentation, namely topic modeling, keywording context. We can examine the context of a given word, and we can compare corpora. So the basic idea behind, the rationale behind Evermat was to provide a critical text mining tool with the help of which you can see the strengths and limitations of data-driven textual analysis. You can use it for teaching, digital source criticism, and data literacy. Today, it has 42 ready-to-use public databases, including, for example, novel collections and drama collections, along with newspapers in 15 languages. Unfortunately, we were not able to add the Latvian collection of novels because it was, I think, only finished last year, and we did not have a spacey model for the language those days. I think now there is a semi-official model for Latvian. And let me share a good news with you. Last week, the manifesto for multilingual digital humanities was published, and it could be very important for those of you who work with computationally under-resourced languages, such as Latvian or Hungarian. I mean, compared to English, we don't have basically all the necessary tools, and this is a very important manifesto. It includes publications that you might want to use during your research. Evermat was running in the German research infrastructure in Göttingen. Now it's hosted by the University of Szeged, but hopefully as of January, you can use it in the new German research infrastructure called Jupyter for NFDI. So, introduction to Freemasonry. This is the next point, the context for our lecture. So, Freemasonry, you might have heard about this secret brotherhood earlier that attracted many famous politicians, kings, monarchs. They include Latvian politicians such as the second president of Latvia, and also a foreign minister in the 1930s. You have American presidents, literary figures such as Goethe, Herder, Tolstoy, who belong to this fraternity. Popular culture, if you read, for example, books by Dan Brown or watch the film National Treasure, you can see many interesting ideas about Freemasonry. They are, of course, often exaggerations. And what are the facts about this fraternity? Not relying on, of course, conspiracy theories. This is one of the largest fraternal organizations in the world. It's got about 2.5 million members, and conspiracy theorists claim that Freemasonry is a homogeneous organization, but of course it's not true. There are many independent grand lodges, leading bodies of the fraternities, so it's, although it's called the Brotherhood, it's basically divided. There were many schisms in the history of the fraternity that basically torn the Brotherhood apart in many ways. And what we need to know for the rest of the presentation is that modern Freemasonry started in early 18th century England. That's when the first Grand Lodge was established. Now let's move on to the second context, namely the sources that I used for the analysis. I encountered several major issues with the and well-known problems with the actual text. Of course, as we are dealing with early modern texts, the problem is related to the poor OCR quality. Let me illustrate this by looking at the Burnick collection of newspapers that I used for one of the case studies. As you can see, the figures, the character accuracy is about 75%, and basically, as the OCR mix recognizes several words, you can only find half of the significant words by traditional searches. And of course, the solution is that we need to clean the text. For this, we can use automatic method, but also we can manually clean them. For example, this is an image from the charges, one of the charges of the Constitution. You can see the result of the OCR text and the cleaned version. And it is very, very time-consuming. Often in digital humanities, people say that 80% of the work is related to the cleaning of your data. Another problem is related to the so-called long S. You can see an image illustrating the long S, and you can perhaps see by looking at the image why often OCR programs recognize the long S as an F. This is a general problem, and for example, if you try to find more keywords in your data set, an advice is that you can basically search for the OCR variants of your terms, such as Freemason rather than Freemason. Actually, you can find more results with the so-called incorrect form of the word than the correct one. I also use the 18th century collection online TCP database for our work. Text Creation Partnership is one of the oldest projects in digital humanities, started in the 1980s. And I was really surprised when I basically analyzed this database, because the promise is that the text in this database, although they come from the 18th century, they were rekeyed. This means that two persons basically transcribed the text, the old text, and then they compared the result and corrected basically the mistakes. And they promised that the corpus basically has about almost 100% accuracy. And there is a remark on the website that only few text TCP5 contains this long S form. But actually, as you can see on the table, there are about 2,400 texts in the Echo TCP. Almost all of them have words with the so-called long S. And this is a major problem when you try to analyze your sources, because you have multiple forms of the very same word. So, for example, you have these with the long S, these with F in the middle, and these the traditional, the normal spelling. And basically, you can't use all of them in the analysis. These will totally distort your results. So again, the solution was to normalize these long S forms and document its procedure. I also mentioned one method that we use, for example, the trigrams. We created trigrams of the text, and the in case of with the long S was replaced with in case of with the normal S. And we also corrected several typical OCR errors. There were some limitations because, for example, some cases were really ambiguous. For example, if you look at the trigram must be thought with a long S, you can't tell whether it is thought or thought. So we honestly admitted that we could not resolve these cases. And you can compare actually the raw corpus with the longest issues and the clean one in the Evermets software. Now let's move on to the very first case study after this introduction. So the question of the research question is, how was Freemasonry as a secret society represented in the 18th century British press? For this, I created a database that contains about almost 12,000 articles. And as part of a primary source edition project, we managed to publish 500 articles of this collection in a Routledge critical edition. And they come from different libraries, Masonic and public libraries as well. And we also used manually crafted collections available in Masonic archives to compile this press database. Now let's see some visualizations about the distribution of the newspaper articles. The first one, that this slide shows the number of Freemasonry-related articles in the 18th century. To be honest with you, when I first saw this visualization, I was really surprised because you might see a peak around 1781 in this graph, and I didn't have a clue of what this peak could refer to those days, because I was not aware of any significant event in the history of British and Irish Freemasonry in 1781. I had expected spikes for other years and other decades. But this visualization could be really misleading in many ways if we are aware of the context, the press history context. In the 18th century, it was not a problem for publishers or editors to plagiarize each other without any kind of acknowledgement. So we have to critically interpret the results of this visualization because, for example, in 1781, you can easily find a number of duplicate articles with the very same content, and we have to basically remove them. This is one problem. The other problem, for this you need to know the context, is that in the 18th century, most newspaper runs are incomplete. So newspaper issues were lost. And this also basically influences the actual analysis. So my idea was to examine the same research question while looking at one or two comprehensive newspaper runs when you have all the issues. So no issues were missing, and one of these newspapers in the British archive is the Gazetteer and New Daily Advertiser, and you can still see the peak in 1781, so it somehow confirmed the hypothesis that something important could happen in the early 1780s. Now let's use Evermet. There is a module with the help of which you can compare corpora. Namely, if you filter your corpus, in our case to 1781, you can identify the unique or characteristic words of a given subcorpus compared to the rest of the text in the corpus. This is called a significant text analysis. So what are the unique words appearing in 1781? Pantomime, harlequin, decoration, epilogue, prologue, perform, conclude, procession. What is your intelligent guess about the event? What might be the topic or the theme that newspaper articles in the 18th century covered? If you look at these keywords, unique words. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yes. Event related to theater, right? Let's see other tools that we can use. This is a context of a given word. With the help of AVMAT, you can visualize the context of a word, the words that are near to our keywords. So, for example, you can see the words within 4 distance from the word Freemason without the so-called stop words. Stop words are like the, and, or not. And you can see similar words: Freemason, Harlequin, pantomime, creation, procession, perform, decoration in this visualization. Let's move on to a little bit more complicated analytical module called topic modeling. This is a machine learning technique with the help of which you can identify hidden patterns and topics. By using certain statistical methods, you can discover themes that are embedded in the text, and you can actually see the connection between these hidden themes and visualize their distribution over time. So topic modeling clusters words in semantic groups ideally. So let's see the result of topic modeling of the newspaper articles. I will only interpret some of these topics. The first one: arrive, country, ship, bridge, letter, carry, new, majesty, Plymouth, and town. These words are related to the movement of the Freemasonry ship in England. Of course, when I basically used this analysis, I did not want to include any articles about the movement of the ship in the primary source collection, but those days I didn't have an idea what topic modeling was. So I could have saved a huge amount of time by using digital methods when we were working on the primary source collection. And you can see topic number 5, the green one: new, harlequin, perform, pantomime, principal, present, theater, conclude, song, and procession. So this new analysis, the topic modeling, also basically highlighted this very important topic in the history of Freemasonry in the newspaper articles. Again, if we visualize the distribution of the topics over time, I use the same color. So green is this theater-related event. You can see that in 1781, there is a peak of the 5th topic. So this also confirms that in terms of the content of the newspaper articles, something happened which is related to theater. You can verify these distant reading findings with the help of close reading. One of the tools that we can use for this is the keyword in context. You can search for a given word and set up how many words we'd like to see before and after your keyword, and you can see the context itself. So we can see that the word harlequin and Freemasons were not used in a metaphorical sense, but they really refer to actual theatrical performances. So let me reveal the secret. A very important pantomime was performed in London theatres in 1781. It was a successful performance which was reported in the newspapers of the day, reviews about the performance. It was written by Charles Dibdin, and it is interesting to note that the study of this play performance has been largely neglected in scholarship, both on the scholarship of Freemasonry and also the scholarship of theater. Let me illustrate this with an example. Bridget Orr published a very important book about British Enlightenment theater. Her article is fundamental, very important, but basically she does not mention the Harlequin Freemason, and she does not refer to the number of actors and theater managers that you can reveal by the help of the analysis of the newspapers, right? So it broadens the picture that is presented in a study published by Cambridge University Press. I had another question about this very same primary source. Which newspapers publish the greatest number of Freemasons-related articles. I was curious why these newspapers published these articles. So you can see that the leading newspapers were the Public Advertisers and the Morning Chronicle and London Advertiser. To answer this research question, I created yet another database with the names of the editors and owners of the newspapers. And because I was curious whether they were Freemasons or not. And I managed to find a very interesting person called James Sparry, who was, by surprise, the editor of the Morning Chronicle that published the greatest number of Freemason-related articles, and he was also the owner and editor of another major paper. And he was very, very influential in, for example, creating British journalism at the end of the 18th century and the early 19th century. And at the same time, he was a high-ranking Mason. He was a so-called deputy Grand Master, one of the leaders of the fraternity. And his personality is important not only basically contributing to the public perception of the fraternity, but he signed a very important document in the history of Freemasonry. In my introduction, I mentioned that there were many rivalries in the fraternity. So, for example, the ancient and modern Grand Lodges were rivaling for 60 years in the 18th century and early 19th century. And there is a document called the Articles of Union that was signed in 1813, which basically unified these rivaling Grand Lodges. And you can find his signature in this document. This is a fundamental document in the history of Freemasonry because that's when the present-day Grand Lodge, the United Grand Lodge of England, was born. Right? Still, Masonic scholars totally ignored basically James Sparry in their accounts of Freemasonry. What are the practical lessons? What are the takeaways that we can learn from the first case study? Newspaper corpora can basically highlight new areas for research, and they can reveal trends that are quite difficult to identify with traditional methods. Digital method also can save substantial time in, for example, critical primary source editing. I was not really aware of digital tools, as I mentioned to you earlier when I was working on this project, but basically it took 6 years, and I think I could have saved half of the time by using DH methods for identifying, for example, all the names in these collections. As I try to test, we need to combine distant and close reading approaches when we analyze our sources. Corpus designs matters a lot because although we've got excellent digital collections, we need to basically supplement them by using archival collections. Also stress the data cleaning and the importance of data cleaning and digital source criticism, so we don't have to take the visualization for face value. And although the newspaper data is imperfect, as you can see, they were still useful and highlighted new areas for research. So you don't need to have perfectly clean data to basically identify, have new findings during your research. Okay, let's move on to the second case study, social network analysis. Here the research question is, who published and sold Masonic books, including secret rituals? Okay, this was the problem for this. I created yet another database of books that are related to Freemasonry. And when I was working in the archives, I realized that many books were not mentioned in the major, well-curated catalog called the English Short Title Catalog. So first I created a database based upon this catalog, and then I had to basically supplement them with these manual collections. In the library, for example, I got the rare books of Freemasonry, which contain many sources that were absent from the English Short Title Catalog. What were the problems with the data? First of all, when the English Short Title Catalog was created, they reduced the number of booksellers. They did not actually copy all the booksellers that were present in the imprints of the actual books. So this is a major problem because the data, certain data were missing. And it was very difficult to correct these mistakes because sometimes those were absent from other catalogs. Other primary sources were not available, they were not digitalized, and several other sources were simply lost. For example, I found this work in the newspaper, The Mason's Creed, and I did not manage to identify any physical copy of this book. Variable names for the same person. This is typical because basically the spelling was not standardized in the 18th century. Another problem is related to the overlapping professional roles of the publishers, printers, and booksellers in reality, but they are not indicated in the actual imprints of the book. Let me illustrate it with a specific example. A given person was, for example, could be a bookseller, was not listed as a bookseller, but we do know from other resources that he was a printer and publisher, right? And a given person had a registered bookshop. So it's natural to assume that if you are a printer and publisher, you sell your books in your own bookshop, but some persons were not listed as a bookseller, right? So we have to manually add and enrich the data. We harmonize the data according to certain editorial rules, and we documented this procedure. This is the overview of the network. It's a very dense network. Of course, you can't see the individual actors of this database, but let's focus on an ego network of Thomas Wilkinson, and I will tell you why this is significant in scholarship. For many years in the history of Freemasonry, scholars argued that there were secret publication or there were so-called exposures of the secret rituals of the fraternity. So some anti-Masons wanted to reveal the secrets of the fraternity, and they published the so-called exposures in several books. Jan Snoek, a major historian of Freemasonry, came up with the idea that this is not quite right. Actually, he realized that these secret exposures were actually written by Freemasons for Freemasons, but they tried to mislead the public by introducing an introduction to these secret rituals in which they mocked and ridiculed the fraternity. He compared the original rituals with these exposures, and he concluded that basically they are very similar. So I wanted to test basically Jan Snoek's hypothesis about the exposures. And what we can see here on this network, you can see the blue nodes are the actual authors, the green ones are the booksellers, and Thomas Wilkinson was the publisher. So actually Thomas Wilkinson published both the most important legal document of the fraternity, namely the Constitution, and several exposures. So it would be totally illogical to assume that the leading body of the organization asks a person to publish both the Constitution and the secret revelations of their rituals. Of course, they collaborated with each other. So it basically reinforces Jan Snoek's thesis. And you can see the historical evidence by looking at the imprints of the actual rituals published by and sold by Thomas Wilkinson. Practical lessons from this network analysis. Even well-curated digital collections, such as the English short title catalog, are incomplete. Try to avoid this offline penumbra phenomenon mentioned by Patrick Leary, who argues that many researchers these days only use digital collections for their research, and he encourages researchers to consult archival resources, which should not be ignored. And as we have seen, we try to harmonize names disambiguate them before building the actual network, and also we had to document all the editorial decisions and corrections. Let's move on to the very last case study. And here the research question is, who wrote the first constitution of Freemasonry? In 1723. For this, we need to have a little longer introduction about stylometry, because I use the methods of stylometry during the analysis. So what is stylometry? Is the quantitative study of writing style, and it tries to measure recurring linguistic patterns such as word or character sequences, and compares them across texts. And by using these linguistic patterns, you can provide evidence about disputed authorship, genre analysis, period, or textual tradition. A well-known example from authorship attribution is related to Shakespearean studies. If you look at the critical 2016 critical edition published by Oxford University, in the introduction you can see that 14 plays were actually co-authored in Shakespearean corpus. For example, one of the co-authors was Christopher Marlowe, who wrote the first parts of Henry VI. Another co-author was John Fletcher, right? And having the right authorship is fundamental when we interpret Shakespearean dramas. So how can we and why can we how can style identify authors? Let's introduce another term, the stylistic fingerprints or authorial fingerprints. They are really subtle authorial patterns that are very difficult to detect with the naked eye, and you can't really control the use of these linguistic patterns, such as the most frequent words that you use. For example, the definite articles. Here I used the Latvian national anthem, and I highlighted the function words. Are, it, where, the, are, us, out of joy, within. Function words do not, their primary purpose is to serve as grammatical purpose rather than carrying lexical meaning, and that they are typical of your writing style. So what we should measure during the stylometric research? Sequences of consecutive items. They are known as n-grams. So for example, in this national anthem, the single words are unigrams, God bless. We can use also word bigrams containing 2 words, and also we can apply them to character n-grams. These days, with the help of the AI and large language models, you can also identify the parts of speech of the text, such as verb, noun, in an automatic manner. So we can again analyze, for example, the trigrams of these parts of speech. How does a text become a vector? In stylometry, we use relative frequencies rather than raw numbers. So earlier I talked about these function words such as the, of, and on, and you can calculate the relative frequency of these words in a given text and all the text that you would like to compare. And these relative frequencies create a vector, right? You can see the same numbers in text A. And each text basically is represented by a vector of these feature frequencies in a high dimensional stylistic space. And the idea is basically to compare these vectors with each other to calculate the distances of these vectors. What is the central idea of authorship attribution? So we've got a text, a disputed text, whose author we are not aware of, right? We have certain guesses, hypotheses about who could be the possible author. You can see author A, B, C, or D. The key is the objective is to find the so-called nearest neighbor among the available candidates. And we apply the methods of authorship attribution. The assumption is that the author among the candidates. There are other methods, for example, authorship verification, where but this is not the assumption at all. So texts can be compared with each other, and we can measure the distances of these vectors by using so-called different distance measures. And you've got a number at the end of measuring these distances, and the smaller the distance, the greater the stylistic similarity is. So, yeah, perhaps it's a bit complicated, but you see the examples later. We should also differentiate between unsupervised and supervised methods in stylometry and in machine learning in general. Basically, with the help of unsupervised method, you can group the text by their stylistic similarity. The algorithm does not use the label text at all. A typical tool in unsupervised methodology is the cluster analysis. And whereas the supervised methods, you've got the training set and a test set, and all the authors are labeled. And basically, the model can learn from the patterns from the known authors, and it will basically use these patterns to predict the likely author of a new text during this process. So another Latvian example, in Latvian literature, you've got different versions of the Lord's Prayer, and this is a cluster analysis which was published 3 years ago that shows basically the different groupings of the Latvian Lord prayers. And what we can see in this visualization is that Johann Arnold Brand's version of the prayer is quite unique and distinct from all the other versions of the Latvian prayer, Lords of Prayer, published in the 16th and 17th century. Okay, the last theoretical point is related to cross-validation and significant text testing. Basically, cross-validations help us to prove and examine the reliability of our methods, and significant testing is used to test whether an observed result is likely due to chance or reflects a real effect. This case study was a result of collaboration. I asked my sons to help me to transcribe and correct the OCR mistakes, for example, in the Masonic corpus, and also I collaborated with Alejandro Javerban, who is a mathematician and a computational statistician. So this is the original document, the primary source, the Constitution of Freemason, that we are going to examine from a stylometric point of view. It is one of the most quoted documents and debated documents in the history of Freemasonry. And it really played a fundamental role in the history of the society. Imagine that in the 18th century, there were 30,000 clubs and societies, and only very few survived. And one of them is Freemasonry, and historians argue that it is related to their constitution that contained certain regulations that the Freemasons were supposed to observe and follow during their meetings. And if you look at the history books, you will see that this constitution is attributed to James Anderson, a Scottish Presbyterian minister, and will question and examine his contribution. So these are the main sections of the constitution. You've got these charges that every Freemasons had to learn, and it was read before the admission of Freemasons. They contained basically the principles of the fraternity. There's a legendary history of the movement, the general regulations that basically clarify the rules that they had to use in the lodges. These are the most important segments. So what were the problems of the authorship attribution? Why is it a disputed issue these days? For example, the author is not mentioned on the title page. Another problem is that the Grand Lodge, the leading body of the organization, had minutes about their meetings, and in these minutes there is no reference to the actual author of the Constitution. So we are now looking at the historical problems. And there is a dedication at the beginning of the Constitution, and in that dedication, John Desaguliers, who was a very good friend of Isaac Newton and a leading Freemason of the day, basically wrote that the author is only associated with the legendary history. About 100 years ago, when they celebrated the publication of the Constitution, a Masonic scholar wrote that perhaps Desaguliers also assisted Anderson writing the Constitution. But his contribution has never ever been examined in scholarship. These are the two possible authors, the candidates, Anderson and Desaguliers. And what were the actual challenges during the analysis? Non-standardized spelling that I referred to earlier, the corpus that we had from Anderson and Desaguliers, they contained a text of various length, and they came from different thematic backgrounds. So we could find, for example, sermon, theological treatises, physical experiments, histories, legal documents, letters. So they were very, very diverse. And we can assume, based upon the earlier hypothesis, that they could collaborate and co-write certain parts of the Constitution. Another major problem was, and this is a problem today in authorship attribution as well, that you don't know to what extent a given publisher or editor actually modified the original manuscripts that the author submitted to the press. And as the standardization of spelling was not clear-cut in this period, the way that we tried to resolve this problem was that we created two separate corpora with the original spelling and the modernized spelling. For example, the arrived with an apostrophe became arrived in the modernized version, and we performed all the analysis on both corpora. And the conclusion was that the original wording performed better during the analysis. So what were the guiding methodological principles that we used during this study? This was a multi-methodological approach that we adopted. We performed about 25 analyses across multiple methods and configuration. Robust testing was important. We tried to test the results across thousands of parameters and combinations. For example, earlier I mentioned different distant measures, Euclidean, Manhattan. I did not want to go to the details, but there are 11 of these, and we tested all parameters and configurations. And the underlying idea was that we wanted to avoid cherry picking. So, of course, scholars these days have certain hypotheses in connection with their primary sources and research questions, and we could easily pick up a preferred configuration to prove our points, to prove our hypothesis, and that's what we wanted to avoid, and test basically all possible or all justified parameter combinations during the analysis. So this is the outline of the methodological workflow. The first phase, we tried to find those methods and algorithm with the help of which we could distinguish between the known texts by Anderson and Desigurier. So we were seeking for those methods which could tell the known works of Anderson and Desigurier from each other reliably and accurately, and we only applied these methods to the disputed texts, right? So this was the central idea, and then we evaluated the cluster analysis results and also the supervised classification results, and at the end of the workflow there was a significant testing about the attributions. So this is one of the results of the cross-validations of the supervised methods of all distance measures. You can see the different distance measures in the first line, the delta, cosine, ergamon, and I highlighted bold those metrics and features that pass the cross-validation. So we only use these methods to vote for the disputed text during our analysis. One visualization is the so-called bootstrap consensus tree, which basically helps us to aggregate all the multiply clustering results into a single tree. You can see that the texts by Desigurier are in blue at the bottom of the screen. The Anderson's texts are in red. And there are two works, the legendary history with its footnotes in black that are quite near to Anderson's writings. There is an assumption that we can assume that they were written by Anderson, but there are texts such as the so-called charges and regulations that we mentioned earlier that are between Anderson and Desigurier's clusters. So our assumption was that they were written by both. Let's see another analysis, the cluster analysis of the charges, where you can see distinct clusters, again Desigurier in blue, and you can see that the first charge is very close to Desigurier text, whereas there are charges above Anderson that were clearly written by Anderson according to this analysis, and there are certain charges which are between the two authors in the clusters. And we had to examine basically these mixed authored charges. There is an excellent method in stylometry called rolling stylometry, with the help of which you can examine works of mixed authorship. The basic idea of rolling stylometry is that you divide your text into overlapping segments, and you perform the analysis of each overlapping segments, and by doing so you can actually analyze and see the development of the style or the changes of the style in a given work. Here, if you look at the first segment, it is the first charge, and it is definitely attributed to Desigurier, right? I don't have the time to go through all the other segments, but the method is very important. This quite important machine learning method, rolling stylometry, for your research. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we also evaluated all the 25 analyses. And what was surprising that basically there was a significant agreement between the different analyses. You can see the results there. And I think the reason could be that there was basically a convergence of the analysis despite the text length and topic differences, is that Anderson and Desigurier had very different writing styles, distinct authorial profiles or fingerprints, if you like. So this is a summary of the results. The historical line, in line with the historical evidence, the stylometric analysis confirmed that the legendary history was written by Anderson. In the charges, there are charges which were closer to Anderson or Desigulier's style. You can see the list. And there is a charge, for example, concerning God and religion, which was written by Desigullier according to our analysis. And I should admit that there are charges where we don't have conclusive results. We could not tell, based upon the statistical evidence, whether Desigullier or Anderson wrote these charges. And this is not a problem. This is not a failure in our methodology. It is natural that we don't have enough or sufficient statistical evidence to prove the authorship. So this is the same for the regulations. There are some sections that are inconclusive. So what are the consequences of the analysis? The findings, the stylometry findings were reinforced by the external evidence. They are in harmony with each other. For example, we interpreted the stylometric findings in the light of the minutes of the Grand Lodge, the leading body of the organization. In history, these earlier attributions, as I mentioned in earlier scholarship, they attributed the constitution to Anderson. It led to many misinterpretations. For example, one historian claimed that Anderson was simply a theological liar because she was unable to reconcile Anderson's theological writings, in which he was very, very conservative theologian, Presbyterian theologian, with the actual very liberal, or religiously liberal first charge. And she argued that she was a theological liar. And now we know that it was probably written by Desigullier, and the historical evidence also supports this conclusion, because Desigullier religious worldview was much more liberal than that of Anderson. And in many church condemnations, they use this first charge in the line of argumentation. And the analytical results also reveal that Anderson played a much more important role in the organization structure of the lodges, because he wrote several regulations as well. So, a warning before I conclude. I uploaded the same text to ChatGPT, in particular a very stylometry expert GPT, and of course I asked the same research question, and this is the result. Well, seemingly this is sort of a right. You've got Anderson as the author of all the texts, but when I ask, it doesn't identify Desigullier, for example, when it comes to the first charge. How this expert GPT came to these conclusions, the explanation was absolutely weird. For example, it turned out that the machine learning algorithm used the so-called content words to find similar text. And this is very, very dangerous, because focusing on the content words, let's say both people, Anderson and Desigullier, published theological treatises. Of course, you can't, there are common words between that they both of them used. You can't use these content words to identify the authorship of a disputed text. So be very, very careful with these expert GPTs. So what are the practical lessons from the authorship attribution? We can revisit unresolved authorship problems with new data-driven methods. They are old historical problems that we can address. I try to argue that corpus design is as important as the statistical methods. Robustness, we need to trust our analysis by using all possible features, parameters, and methods. My suggestion was to avoid cherry picking, to basically prefer certain configuration to prove your hypothesis, and we should not over-interpret our results. And we should combine statistical evidence with historical and biographical evidence. when we interpret our results. And we should honestly report uncertainties in our corpus, and we should not treat these inconclusive results as failures of our research. It's natural that statistical evidence cannot solve all the problems. We should share the corpus, code, and parameters wherever possible. So, for example, we publish the corpus and the codes on GitHub. You can rerun the same code. And stylometric research is as much philology and corpus criticism as statistics, which is a very important point. And perhaps a possible application for the Latvian audience that, as far as I know, the very first novel that you have is also co-authored by two brothers, and basically you can apply this rolling stylometry module to analyze and explore the individual contributions of these two brothers. Okay, and the last slide is about the practical principles for responsible digital humanities, some general takeaways. We should begin with a research question and a critical understanding of the sources. So I always tell my students that you should not start a DH project if you are not aware of the context of your sources and their limitations. Why? Because cultural data is not given. Cultural data is always a social cultural product. It's constructed, as we have seen, it's imperfect, and that's why we need to examine biases, missing data, and see the unsearchable material in our database or corpus. That's for this we need to apply digital source criticism to our collections, metadata, and also the OCR text. As for the codes, programming codes, we should understand the logic of the code. Not necessarily every detail. We should, for example, understand what parameters the code uses, and also identify the biases and shortcomings of our programming codes. I try to argue that these computational outputs as evidence, they are evidence and not conclusions. We have to critically interpret all these results in the light of the historical evidence. And again, I want to encourage you to report limitations and editorial decisions in a transparent manner. And we can use these computation methods to identify overlooked patterns, test existing hypotheses, and open new areas of research. That's what I wanted to basically demonstrate with the case studies. And we should open to the surprises and the unexpected results during our analysis, because they can question our previous hypothesis. And let me conclude my lecture with a quotation from Peter Burke, the historian. Statistics can be faked, but so can tests. Statistics are easy to misinterpret, but so are texts. Machine-readable data are not user-friendly, but the same goes for many manuscripts written in almost illegible hands or on the verge of disintegration. So traditional and computational analysis both require critical interpretation. So final statement could be that I try to demonstrate with these case studies that computational outputs become meaningful through source criticism, contextual knowledge, algorithmic understanding, and methodological transparency. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And now we open the discussion.
Thank you very much for your really interesting lecture. I have two questions. One is, could you tell a little bit more about the role of editor in bringing together the contribution of both authors, of Anderson and the other in establishing the constitution, since editors had big role in both, of course, editing, but at the end of the day, publishing the work. And the second question that builds on your research and allows us to ask more questions is how can we hypothesize how the process of writing and perhaps collaboration, exchange between these two authors looked like, since we know that there was no single author of the Constitution, and based on the digital methods we can see that there was something more going on during the process. So these two questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Basically, let me answer the second question. The historical evidence suggests that first Anderson created the text of the Constitution itself. He was asked by the Grand Lodge to compile a new document based upon old resources, such as the medieval old charges. He needed money because he was bankrupt those days, so that's why he compiled the Constitution. And the procedure that you asked about was that he submitted this document to the Grand Lodge, and there was a body within the Grand Lodge, 14 brethren, who basically read this manuscript, the first version, and basically made some changes in the document. And that's why certain sections of the constitutions have more than one author, and the results, you remember the results side, we could tell which charge, for example, or the legendary history were written by which person. But in certain cases, when the results were inconclusive, we don't know basically whether, we could refute the single authorship. Perhaps one of the 14 brethren wrote a particular charge or regulation. And another historical problem is that the regulations were originally compiled by a person called George Payne. And unfortunately, this original manuscript was lost. So in the article that we published, we came to the conclusion that if somebody finds the original manuscript of the regulations, of course, we need to rerun the entire analysis because this is missing. And perhaps these inconclusive charges were written by either Payne or one of the 14 brethren, right? So this was the actual procedure that we can reconstruct based upon the historical evidence, which are in harmony with this stylometric research. And your first question is related to the roles of editors and publishers. We can't tell to what extent they modify the original text. That's why we created two versions of the text of Anderson and Desigulé. The conclusion was, as I mentioned to you, that the original wording performed better when it comes to the distinguishing the known author, the text of the Anderson or Desigulé works. They could the original corpus could tell the differences more accurately than the modernized version, and that's why basically we use the original wording. So the assumption is that basically the editors and publishers did not manage to modify all the text to a considerable degree that could modify the stylometric fingerprints, right? Yes?
Thank you for your inspiring lecture. It was really interesting to hear more about the 18th-century newspapers. I have worked with ECHO dataset during my study period. And we worked with diachronic word-to-vec models. But I wanted to ask about stylometry. Why did you use stylometry in your research instead of, for example, text reuse algorithms? And what are, for example, limitations for stylometry or text reuse algorithms, what you have observed? Thank you.
Yes, I know about these text reuse algorithms, but they don't help you to identify the authorship of any disputed text at all. Basically, a text reuse algorithm, the idea is that they find parallel text, common passages between different works, and you can basically visualize a distribution of these verbatim passages that are repeated in works. You might want to check one of the most recent text reuse tool created by Mikko Tolonen, and the name of the tool is Reception Reader, that's right. And with the help of Reception Reader, you can trace these common passages before and after a given work, so how they are repeated. And you might want to know about the most recent project related to text reuse. Mikko Tolonen and his computational history group in Helsinki also created a new software with the help of which you can mine the translations. That means this came out 2 months ago, and with the help of which you can compare, for example, the Gallica, the French major national database, with the ECHO, and you can find a text reuse in translation as well. This is strongly related to the semantic meaning of the text rather than the verbatim references that the reception reader identifies in the first page. I think this is a major development in NLP and historical research, that we can now basically detect translated passages between different languages. And these databases are absolutely huge, right? For example, ECHO contains about 300,000 books, and I don't know about Gallica, but this is again a major resource for French historians running from the 16th century to the present day.
So if I can add on the topic of the text reuse versus stylometry, if we're talking about the stylometry method used in your presentation, this was, I believe, stylo
yes.
package in R, and it, I think, employs the same principles that we would use in the text reuse. So text reuse classically looks at the fragments of text and looks at passages and sees if these passages are repeated somewhere, but this can be applied also to larger text, to articles, and even then to books. And stylometry applies these text similarity methods to the entire books if needed, but the algorithms that are used, some of them overlap, I guess. I'm not a computer science, so I couldn't say which ones, like the Manhattan distance, Euclidean, probably there are some of these, but then stylometry group developed their own even better distance metrics, the deltas, that they were developed by experimenting, specifically looking at what works for these monograph length works. But I think in essence this is not like something. This is the same basic principles for text similarity metrics. Only this is a deeper explored in a stylometry method. But I have a question about the times of land surveyors. One of the first of two, actually that year, 2 novels were published, but one of them, the most famous one, was the Times of the Land Surveyors. And I know that students who use stylo, they sometimes experiment with looking at this book, but I don't know whether this could work for a serious research, because from those 2 authors, only one of the brothers wrote other novels, and the second brother, he has the other texts, but not novels. And would this even work? Could we like find nearest neighbors among his different genre texts? So how this would work if we don't have other novels for one author, different texts, how this would work?
Yeah, this is a very important question because in stylometry, the ideal scenario is that you compare texts of the same genre, but it's not always the case. In our case study, we had very, very diverse texts ranging from theological treatises to letters, texts about physics, physical experiment. Desiree was a physician, basically. So the very important starting point is, in this case, is that one brother published only novels, the other types of documents. You might remember the first phase of our workflow. If you manage to find certain methods that could tell the known texts of the two brothers from apart, that's okay. You can solve this research problem. But if none of the methods or combination of the certain parameters work, it's impossible. So you have to find those reliable methods that can tell these novels and the other writings apart, and then apply only these algorithms to the disputed text, namely the very first novel. And you should try all possible parameters, all classifiers, all distant measures, and yeah, thousands and thousands of analysis should be needed for this.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Hi, thanks for the interesting presentation. I have two questions. First one, is the Freemasonry Press database online? And the second one is, can you elaborate more on how you identified those press articles on Freemasonry? I'm curious mostly whether you found them physically and digitalized them yourself, or you found them online in public repositories, and if the latter, then how? Thanks.
Yeah, let's get started with the second question. First, I used the Burney collection of newspapers as a starting point because it contains basically digitalized version of the newspapers in England and Ireland. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it is incomplete. And for the queries, I use, for example, all different OCR variants, for example, Freemaphon or Masonic. And by doing so, I managed to identify, I think, about 6,000 references to Freemasonry in the 18th century press. And then I worked in Masonic archives when amateur Freemasons actually typed newspaper articles, and they have certain collections. Or sometimes they had, in Ireland, for example, in Dublin, they had a handwritten collection of newspaper articles. So it was a very, very time-consuming process. I had created a databases of these archival collections, and I go back to the original digitalized versions because by looking at these archival collections, I managed to find also those articles which are in the digital collection, but I was not able to find them because of the poor OCR. So I checked how a given word was recognized actually in that digital corpus and rerun the search query again. So and I found more results. So this was basically the procedure. And unfortunately, I forget your first question. Yeah, no, it's not online. No. This is not online. Yes, the Burney collection is behind a paywall, but this database is not. We published basically 500 articles from this collection in this primary source edition, but the entire database is not online. Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question. You mentioned about booksellers and the printers.
Yes.
Are there instances where you have tracked this kind of inconsistencies, let's say, and how did you approach actually creating the metadata for them? Was it from our interpretation point of view that probably this is the booksellers or also the printers, or did you have a different strategy on how to like contextually document them as metadata? Thank you.
Yes, to come up with the editorial principles that were inconsistencies between booksellers and printers, I used other resources as well. On one of the slides that I deleted in the morning, I had a book catalog index, which is about a British excellent catalog about printers and booksellers. For the context, basically, it was a very important resource. So, for example, if I went through all the entities, all the persons in my original database, and I checked what this book index actually had about these persons. And if I found that, for example, a printer had a bookseller shop, I also enriched my metadata accordingly. Right? This was a major help for coming up with the editorial principles. So I try to use different resources. And another method was to go back to the original title pages. Because as I mentioned to you earlier, in the English short title catalog, perhaps some librarians were lazy, and they, after the third bookseller, they did not type the fourth or fifth one. And I also enriched the metadata by looking at the original imprints of the book, but often they were not available, as I mentioned in the presentation. So historical records are extremely complex, and the current database I know is incomplete, but that's what need to be, we have to cope with these incomplete data. As you could see, although the database is incomplete, they can highlight important questions of research.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring lecture and presentation. My question is about this rolling stoichiometry methods. So you mentioned that you used it for detecting this mixed authorship. Mm-hmm. So how about, or do you think that we can use these methods as understanding, for example, the writers changing his style in his writing career, for example, in the first 20 years, he can write another style and then he changed. So can you use these methods also for the one person, but two different, like, just style, let me say?
Very, very good question. I don't have the immediate answer for this because rolling stoichiometry was created to analyze mixed authorship, and this is an absolutely valid problem that a person's writing style changes over time. Just briefly reflecting on the current project that we are working on, there is no baseline study on Hungarian novels, authorship attribution study, and we created basically certain temporal clusters, even within the lifetime of a single author, about 20 years clusters, with the help of which we can detect the changes of a given author's style over time. And the idea of this research is to find basically which are the best configuration settings to identify the authors in a larger corpus. And I'm just thinking loudly, so if we find differences in our baseline study, let's say in the first 20 years of an author's lifetime, what would be the best methods and parameters and configuration settings which, for example, worked in the first 20 years, and how they differ, for example, in the next 20 years. From this perspective, you can see how you can measure the changes of the style over time, but I'm not sure the rolling classify algorithm is appropriate for this. Yeah, but yeah, perhaps we should ask Eder, who wrote the software, but I doubt, because you know that the assumption is that there are some distinct authorial fingerprints, and of course, I think given authors' stylistic fingerprints do not undergo significant changes over time, but perhaps I'm wrong. I think it depends from author to author. Yeah, it could be, yeah.
But in Stylo package, there are other functions, function packages. So rolling stylometry is one, classically used for detecting changes of style in one text. But then if you use different methods, you provide to the algorithm different authors, but also several works of one author. And you designate from which year this is, and then the dendrograms or other types of PCA visualizations, they deliver you the results, how close are the works of a particular author, and then you can literally see if there is this change over time, whether they remain the same, similar to each other, or later works are clustered closer together, earlier works closer together. But everyone who has worked with Stylo and novels know that even poetry books, I've looked at them, know that this is amazingly shows the same results, that works of the same author clustered together, and works from one decade clustered together, and so on, with some exceptions. And these exceptions are then interesting, why this happened.
Yes, but for this purpose, I think you use cluster analysis rather than supervised learning. You ask about rolling stylometry, which is a supervised method, so it's different. Yes, you are right. With the help of cluster analysis, you can detect these changes, but that's a different algorithm. So, for example, rolling stylometry mostly uses the support vector machine technique. Yeah.
Last question from the audience. Are there hands? So, yes, maybe my last question. So, these tools you were showing us, are they, for whom are they available to? Are they students of the University of Szeged, or are they available for everyone? Only you can look at this data that's currently in there, or we as a National Library could give data to you, and you would provide also tools for us. How this would work?
That's a very good question. Well, everybody can use it now. This Evermat research tool, just you have to register, and you will see the databases, the public databases there. Honestly, the project doesn't have money today, so when the Göttingen hosted the software, basically we offered the users to analyze their own private databases after submitting a request, because even the project money that we received was limited in terms of covering the server costs. For example, if you want to explore a large Latvian newspaper database, it could be very expensive by using these language models. So currently it is hosted at the University of Szeged, but you can use the public databases only. You can create your own private instance, but unfortunately we are not able to analyze them for you. Hopefully we won a project, a German project. This is Jupyter for NFDI application 2 weeks ago. So hopefully from September onwards, they cover all the server costs and provide 3 software engineers to help us our work, but still my university does not have any resources to cover the expenses on our side, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm asking this just because you said, okay, you didn't have your corpus yet previously. This is why we don't have it. So No, we have it. We could give it to you, and probably it would allow our researchers to explore it with your methods. But let's talk about this during the lunch break, which is approaching. Thank you so much, Robert, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye. Thank you.